Um, Good evening. Are we ready? Okay. Good evening, everyone present at this pavilion and the viewing public. We do have a quorum, and so I hereby call this public hearing for your Committee on Cannabis to order. The agenda for today's meeting was issued on June 10, and copies are provided online and on the tables there. Oy, that's right. May I get a motion to adopt today's agenda? There is a motion to adopt today's agenda and has been seconded. Those in favor of adopting today's agenda, please say aye. Those opposed, please say nay. The ayes have it. Today's agenda has been adopted. Moving on, I'd like to announce some housekeeping rules and introduce the members of your Committee on Cannabis, as well as the staff of the Legislative Bureau who are assisting us today. Please silence your cell phones and keep any noise level at a minimum or at zero level. Allow me to introduce the members of your Committee on Cannabis. On my left, Rep. Selena Magofnia. Selena. Rep. Corina Magofnia. And on my right, Rep. Vicente Comotu. Both of them from P3. I'm the chair, Denita Kaipadiangtamay. I'm also representing P3. I'd like to also recognize the staff of the LB or who are here with us today. Our legal counsel, Brendan Lade, the senior legislative assistant assigned to your Committee on Cannabis, Ms. Clarissa Sablon, will be keeping the minutes of this meeting. Our Sergeant at Arms, Sarge Peter Toay, and our IT Manager, Mr. Delbert Kamotsu, will be recording our meeting live for the cable as well as streaming it live on FB on the CNMI's legislature's page. Please be advised that even if we are on recess, our FB Live will continue streaming. We will now move to the next item on the agenda, which is public comments. I'd like to now open the floor for public comments on HB 2278 to clarify the powers of the CMI Commission, Cannabis Commission, and make needed changes to the Commonwealth Code to support adequate development of the cannabis industry in the Commonwealth. I would like to ask that you keep it at 5 minutes. Um, for your info, we contacted 5 government agencies um, to attend this session today. NEMO, Northern Islands Mayor's Office, the Secretary of Commerce, and and the Sinamay Cannabis Commission, the Department of Public Land Secretary, and the DPS Commissioner. And the present today are the members of the Cannabis Commission. Thank you. And you have 5 minutes to share your comment.
If I could. Good afternoon. This is a lovely place to hearing, and so thank you for bringing me outdoors. I like it. My name is Matthew DeDangura. I'm the Vice Chairman of the Cannabis Commission, and I'm only providing public comment because I wasn't on the invite list for the agenda, and I wanted to just also, in addition to providing public comments, open up that I'm very interested in answering any questions you may have and being a part of this conversation. Essentially, I'm wanting to just reiterate the point that we made previously within public comments on this bill, that there are some crucial amendments that we've been working through under the premise that the reality really that this bill that we're working on and talking about and amending today was really a melding of different ideas that were originating and brewing over several years. And you could see that in a lot of the different areas where there's conflicts and there's some issues that have come up within the actual administering of the law and regulating the industry. The first of these is the amendments to 4 CMC 53054A. This was a provision that was mentioned in the governor's transmittal letter after the signing of 2105 that clarified some of the allowances for those seeking medical marijuana licensures between the ages of 18 and 21. Over the age of 21, it's really, that's the base age, but then the medical marijuana provision allows for those 18 to 21 to be able to use for medical conditions. Second is the second is the basis for denial on homegrown registry applicants. Under the current law, there's an explicit note that the commission may not deny any applicants for homegrown registry, yet we are asked to put in place a process for applications. So we were asked to put in a process and have guidelines for accepting applications, but even if we find significant faults, or if there's a concern about public safety, or a concern about any of the guidelines that are present in the law, we are unable to deny by the law. And so the request within this this amendment is to just strike out that portion and allow the commission, under reasonable basis, to deny an applicant for a homegrown registry permit. The third is the current statutory set expiration date of September 30th for all licenses. Under the current system, we have 8 commercial licenses right now, and that is something that's growing as we're working through it. With the expiration for all licenses set on September 30th, it does create the potential for a significant backlog in processing and adjudicating applicants for renewal licenses when they all are occurring at the same time frame. Further, it does create a bit of an issue for applicants who are interested in entering the market, but they only have several months because there is no allowance for prorating application fees or timelines. And the request would be, and the provision that we support within the law is to allow the licenses to operate within a year of licensure. That gives us room to schedule in renewals, schedule in processing and adjudication. And it doesn't create a significant backlog that would hamper potentially the ability to issue out renewals. The third is the amendment to 53031B. Right now, there's an allowance for a certain time period for licensees to submit their books to the commission upon request. What we would like and what would be beneficial within the regulatory functions would be to have their books on hand and have a shortened time frame so that there isn't any issues with our request for these information from the licensees. And it was a recommendation from the AG's office. The third is the additional recommendation and area of support under this bill that we would ask for your consideration is amendments to 53008, adding section R that would allow the commission to, within public information requests and Open Government Act requests, to withhold certain information relating to security procedures of the licensees. In particular, we would not necessarily think that it's a safety benefit to the safety of the general licensees or the public if they knew where the security cameras were, where the safe was, where the critical information within the licenses. It's all information that we contain and require within the licensure process, but would potentially create some problems if they were publicly available. And the last of our asks is for the creation of a revolving fund. Right now, all of the fees, fines, the license application fees go into the general fund and not into a revolving account. Under the premise that it would be appropriated, we feel like there's efficiency in allowing us to maintain the fees and the fines that collect and use that within the regulatory functions, which is similar to a lot of agencies. And thank you for your time. I don't know if I've exceeded my time frame, but I would like to be available for questions that you may have. So thank you so much.
Thank you for clarifying these things on the bill. Any questions, reps? Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, oh, cannot hear? Okay. Sorry. Um, any more for public comments? Okay. You're good. I would like to thank all of you for being present today. Okay, let's get into the next item on the agenda, which is old business. Oh, hold on. You're doing the public comments. Uh, anyone else for public comments? Okay, we have the managing director for the cannabis, Mr. Eric Vasa. Go ahead.
Good evening, committee. My name is Eric Bossa. I am the inspector for the Division of Permit and Licensing. And most recent, I am now the acting managing director for the Cannabis Commission. To follow up on the vice chair's comments, we are in full support of this bill, and we hope to have your support in the passage of this bill. And we have, just to note on record, that we have submitted our written proposal to the committee. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Basa. Any more for public comments? Okay. Let's get into the next item on the agenda, which is the old business. There's only one item, which is House Bill 22-78, to clarify the powers of the CNMI Cannabis Commission and make needed changes to the Commonwealth Code to support adequate development of the cannabis industry in the Commonwealth. I now open the floor for discussion amongst the members. Or we just go to, sorry, I would like to recognize Rep. Lizama. Recognize the presence. Okay. Oh, yes, go ahead, Rep. Komatsu.
All right. Thank you, Chair. My first question. When the industry was created, was it to generate revenue for the cinema?
If you once more permit me to sit alongside you.
Just
Sure.
stay there, yes.
Or I guess we can head up. So just in general, in talking with the sponsors of the previous bills, I know that they were considering some level of commercial activity being available. As to the general intent at the time, I believe that there was a action of the legislature, and they had definitely considerations about opening up commercial activity, and in response, having some level of revenue generated from that.
Thank you.
Uh,
So I'm still going.
Okay, go ahead.
Initially, when all this started, it was all about medical or medicinal marijuana. Has that actually been accomplished, or what happened to that? Are we still working on medicinal marijuana?
So again, I think going back to my original comments, it does seem, like you said, there was an original intent for medical being the primary focus, as it has been in other places. But you could see how they've added in different components where in the current time frame, the difference between a medical marijuana patient in a commercial aspect and going to a retail provider and acquiring marijuana is no different than it would be for a regular user. Anyone over the age of 21, regardless of medical need, has access to cannabis. The only difference being those within 18 to 21, which are some of the recommendations in this bill to try to rectify and make sure that it's that the law is aligned with some of the requirements for identification checks. The law is very strict in certain areas, saying that nobody under the age of 21 should be allowed to purchase marijuana, and that's something that we hold very seriously within our regulatory functions. But there is the allowance for those 18 to 21 with adequate medical need that is accompanied by a recommendation from a physician. And the law right now is a little bit provides additional complications as to how to accurately treat that or appropriately treat that population.
Okay, thank you for that. Next question. is the industry catering to the tourists? Because I think that's one of the initial creation of this, to get the tourists coming in and get them all high and spend their money in the cinema. Is that happening?
I'm sure that we'll get more information about the tourist demand for marijuana as the tourism starts to recover. We had our first applicants, and the regulations being completed within the 180-day timeline during COVID, and applicants started coming in during COVID. Licensors were issued during COVID, and so as the tourism starts rebounding in the coming years, we'll be able to get more data as to what the demand is.
Thank you for that. Next question. Um, Revolving funds. The revolving funds, in other words, this will be the business unit that the industry is going to manage themselves, correct? Um, are the staff for the industry being paid by this revolving funds, or are they getting paid differently or from other sources?
It was our understanding when the original amendment that allowed for the commission to begin operation, which was 2105, had the understanding that all revenues and fees, fines collected by the commission would go into the general fund and be appropriated for the operations, to supplement the operations, to provide for staff compensation and these things. I think at the last budget, we were able to receive general fund money, and that is what is supporting the salaries and compensation of staff.
In the past 5 years, is the industry at least show some kind of lucrative revenue or generation of monies?
So I think timeline-wise, we've only really been in operation for about a year. The licensures are coming up on their first renewals or just finished their first renewals in September. So we haven't had a full year of operation yet. So there's a lot of kinks in any industry that hasn't existed, a lot of issues, but also further compounded by COVID, obviously, that has reduced revenue for everybody.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Rep. Kamatsu. Any more questions? Yes, Rep. Corina.
Okay. Can you guys hear me? Okay. So, in line with the revolving account, the proposal to allow the commission to have its own revolving account. Have you guys had a chance to look at your financials? And if so, as of when?
So I think we've been going through right now the Munis process and getting trained up and make sure that we have full access of it. And I think we had a training with the staff today. We know that there is just a straight amount of what is the license fees paid and what is the application fees paid and what has been received. And I have that information both in the citizen-centric reports that we submit annually and also in prior presentations to the legislature. Right off the top of my head, at current numbers, I'm not able to provide that for you at the moment unless we have it. No, we can get that for you though. So my apologies on not being able to have that on hand.
Not a problem. And I was just curious because if the Cannabis Commission is requesting for a revolving account, do they have an amount in mind that so that we could potentially or possibly set a cap? That way, whatever overage can go back into general fund.
So we do have obviously our ideal budget, which is something we submitted to OMB. It is definitely not the absolute requirements of our operation. There are certain areas that we would definitely need funding in order to adequately regulate, and I think that's the key point. Is that what we're trying to do is set up a regulatory regime that is robust enough that complies with the federal. It recognizes that there are some issues with the federal illegalization and trying to be cognizant of that and providing for a proper regulatory system that keeps that in mind. One of the areas that is probably the biggest expense that we're hoping to get additional funding for is through things like the revolving account or other elements, which is the CTS, the Cannabis Tracking System. And that is widely used among all of the regulatory bodies within the states. There are applications that are available and that can be tailored to the CNMI's regulatory regime. There are regulations and our policies. It does ease up a lot of the functions of the staff that we're currently doing by paper or electronically through other means, such as the monthly reporting processes, the checks on employees. It can even go so far if you have the financing to afford different modules of this package to track the delivery and the transportation through GPS in real time. So there's a lot of different capabilities that are available should we have the resources to be able to do it. And these platforms are subscription based for the most part, and so they're recurring payments. But the initial startup does come with a higher price. Just the way that it would work would be that we would pay for the higher end price, and we have a RFP that we're looking at, or an RFQ, to kind of get what the prices are officially and make sure that we have a documented idea of what we're looking at. And then some of the costs would be shared by the users, and that would be a requirement of each licensee would maintain a subscription service to that. And hopefully we can get it to a point where those subscription costs for the licensees are minimal and not hindering their operation or their ability to continue. And so these are the ongoing conversations, but we do recognize since the onset that this was a requirement and it will cost some money to be able to afford long-term.
Absolutely. I'm in total support of getting that CTS because that would be one of the most effective and efficient way to ensure that the Cannabis Commission is on track and, just be able to sustain itself. But I was curious, for clarification, is the revolving account to be used for operations?
Yes, that's potential.
Okay. And then I'm not sure, you probably said it, but were you guys able to get an estimate of how much the CTS would cost? At least the basic for now?
Yeah, we have had we've had conversations with other regulatory bodies. I know that previously we've had conversations with Massachusetts and other places, Colorado. And so we have a good idea of what the estimate is, but we needed to go through the RFQ process to make sure that these are all clear, documented, and that we're not going outside the bounds of any of the processes that are there. So we do have that drafted up, and I think we've released. No, we have not. We were planning on releasing it soon, and so that would give us a much clearer picture.
Sure. And do you have a ballpark figure of what that would cost? I know you're still in the process of putting out an RFQ, right? But just do you have a figure in mind just so that we kind of have an idea of what that range is?
Yeah, initially we were expecting to be required. I know that if we say what our expectations were, and if somebody was looking at bidding on it, they would try to mirror that expectation. We were thinking in the early days, and this is of a full implementation, like a full package of a larger product we wanted to have at least a cushion of about 150,000. But I can be corrected on that. I can go back on the records and make sure that is accurate.
Sure. And I asked for the purpose of, like, we're in the budget season, right? And so if that was one of the things that the agency needs to function effectively and efficiently, then that's definitely something for us to consider. Also, I wanted to ask, we're still on the subject of revolving account now. Do you, I guess I'm looking at revenues versus expenses, right? And so is the commission right now generating enough revenue to sustain its operations?
No, I do not believe at the current moment that that's the case.
And I was curious if, for example, if the revolving account is given to the commission, Will they also be asking for additional funding assistance through general funds, or will the funds in the revolving account be sufficient to take care of whatever its needs are?
I think the ideal would be for that to be the case. But I think the reality of the current economic environment is that, and also with the current structure of cost for licenses and applications, it would probably need to be additional resources at the current time frame, and as we work towards gaining that allowance.
So in an ordinary business, right, one would take a look at their financials and evaluate it to determine what the longevity is, whether or not it's able to sustain its operations, 1 year, 2 year, 3 years from now. So is that I remember, or I recall from what the prior managing director has said, I guess the commission is not generating enough revenues to sustain its operations. And based on that information, I mean, where do we see ourselves going forward? I mean,
Yeah, I think this is a really important conversation. And it comes down to what is the value of public service and what is the product that we're producing. We are not producing cannabis products. We're not producing cannabis licenses. We're not producing anything related directly to the economics of the industry. What we are providing and what we are tasked to provide under the law is regulation for an industry. And it really is, what does the cost of regulation stand like? And whether or not it's providing for itself is a separate conversation, I think, as to whether we're expecting regulation of public safety and the public well-being to pay for itself. If that is the expectation, then that is definitely a different conversation. If the expectation is to provide for a regulatory system that does what it can within its means to be able to make sure that the law is being upheld, then that is something that, regardless of how much we're generating, is something that we would want to strive to do.
so based on that, and I agree that the enforcement portion of this is very, very key. And if the commission itself is not generating enough funds to even sustain that part of the service, have there been any talks between the administration maybe and the commission to see how they can help subsidize some of the gap?
Yeah, I think Eric is a good example, and we were just talking about this just over there, about the level of partnership we've had with government agencies and the administration. For instance, Eric is our only employee, yet we have enforcement officers, we have permitting officers, all tasked from the Division of Revenue and Taxation, from Department of Public Safety, all aiding in the process and working with us within the resource constraints to be able to make the job done well. And they've been really committed and really effective in working with our team and making sure that we're all one team under one mission and not doing DPS functions, but it's all under the cannabis mission. So that, I think that is maybe an example of what you're asking about.
Sure.
There's smaller ones, like we've chipped in on office repairs. We've gotten equipment from other agencies that are refitting them. We've definitely done all we can to help chip in, figure it out. And it's been a lot of partnership and grateful partnership from other agencies.
Great. So, and that's great to hear. So if I'm understanding you correctly, essentially what you're saying is that you do have partnerships with other agencies in where they would kind of lend a support system with you guys, right? But there are no expectations as to any due funds from inter agencies. So essentially, they're assisting you by providing you with manpower, so to speak, but there are no expectations as to your commission owing them anything back in return, maybe at a later time. This is strictly just kind of donating their services to your commission to help out.
I think there's definitely collaboration both ways. One area in particular that Monique, our managing director prior, was really focused in on, and something that we think provided a lot of value throughout different agencies, was the training. a lot of public safety officers weren't necessarily aware of the specifics of the law, and it was impacting their duties when they come across issues. And so they put in a lot of effort. The staff has put in a lot of effort into providing for some pretty robust training on DPS officers, customs officials, to make sure everybody's on the same page. And it sounds like from the responses that it's been something really appreciated and something that has been helpful to them. And so we hope that that's been the case and that we can continue to do that.
Well, that's great to hear, that we are helping each other out. We are a small community, and so we do appreciate whatever help that we can get from the others, especially when we don't have the resources to do it ourselves. So that's really great to hear. That's it for me. Thank you, Madam Chair. I
Okay,
yield.
thank you, Rep. Corina. Yes, Rep. Ben.
So, in all fairness to the youths ages 20 and under, has the industry considered incorporating its policies and regulations into the Department of Youth Services and the school systems to educate the youths about the laws and the policies of this industry?
I think that's always been an interest area to do widespread public communication. I think one of the plans that we've had originally following the training of the law enforcement officials was to do webinar series, to do communication and outreach, not just for public school system, but also with the hospital, to talk about the health issues. This is an area that has been delayed as a long-term plan because of COVID and these issues. We did have a session with the government agencies, an information session that was attended by folks like the Substance Abuse and Rehabilitation Center, OPM, a range of government. We invited pretty much, I think, every government entity to join in that conversation and just share what the law was, give them what our bounds are as regulators, that we regulate commercial activity. We don't regulate the criminal activity. That is a DPS function. We regulate within the bounds of those individuals that have licenses. And so making sure that we set the expectations appropriately among government agencies, that would help, I think, has helped make sure that people understand where responsibilities under the law end and where responsibilities begin in other areas.
Now we're talking about something different here. We're not talking about generating revenues and who smokes it and all that. Now we're talking about it's only fair that the kids know and understand what's going on. Now, would I be able to find any of those in any of the websites? Can I go to the school and say, hey, look, are you guys actually teaching these kids or educating them about the industry, and you cannot do this, you can do that? But you see what I'm saying? DYS, PSS, do they actually have their own policies about the use of cannabis in the schools?
It's been a while since I believe that the current policy was that drug-free campuses is still in effect, that they do obviously have a lot of resources and consideration behind making sure that their students aren't engaged in illegal activities for their age brackets. One of the initiatives that we did do early on was a series of information products that we did put into the papers, that we did put into the public perception. I believe it's on our website, called High Expectations, which was talking essentially about what are the regulatory processes, what is allowed, what isn't allowed, trying to clarify some of the misconceptions about what the law provides and what is the proper way to be able to conduct and utilize products derived from this industry in a way that is in line with what the law requires.
And the reason I brought that up is because within this no HB, it says here that you cannot display cannabis materials, where there are kids that are under 21. Now, wouldn't they wonder why? Kids are curious, but if they understand how the system works, I believe that they'll be okay with that. So I'm just saying, we have to understand that our youths are very important too, and everybody just goes amok and do what they want to do, it won't be good for us, for them. So would I be able to find that anywhere on the website? It's in my website. Just give me that, and I'll just look it up myself. Thank you.
Sorry, just pulling it up now, trying to make sure that it's there. Licensing guides. So our website, just in case you're interested, is cnmicannabis.org. And that's where we have notices, meeting minutes, and also license information, forms, and other documentation.
Specifically for PSS and DYS.
We can work on putting that together. Like a youth page, like a page for students, like a student's page on the website.
That'll be great, no? Student page.
Yes.
Right.
I need
Thank
to
you,
know.
Rick. Good idea. Okay, any more questions? Any more questions? You yield? Okay. Yes, Rep Lizama.
Thank you, Chairwoman. The question that I want to ask you, Mr. Guerrero, the citation, do you have a legal counsel or someone in your office now to determine what will be the fine for anyone that violates the law? Do you have that already in place in terms of volume? How much would that be? If it's a large volume, then of course it would be illegal. Do you have that?
Yeah, thank you. So we recently put together our schedule for penalties and our processes for penalties. We have 3 classifications of violations:
Okay.
minor, major, the highest one. I'm sorry. But within those classifications, we list areas that are derived from both the law and the regulations as to what would be typically immediate sort of violations and where they would fall within that. We've been going through with the Attorney General's office, and that's where we get our legal advice to make sure that the process of doing enforcement actions is firm and fixed, that there isn't any holes that we are missing within the regulations, that we can start clearing up before there are real major violations that occur. We are working with the staff level, working through the creation of the citation book for public safety officers out there in the public so that they're aware and that they can issue the proper citations, but that process also has to go through the judiciary. And so we do have penalties. We have processes for enforcement actions, and we have these elements in regulations as of April, I believe. There's 2 different types. These are civil in a way. There are criminal violations that have penalties that are listed within the law. Enforcement of criminal penalties and the institution of criminal penalties or enforcement of these elements is again a DPS function that we would assist with, but it isn't within the regulatory scope of us.
So if this become a law, are you ready to do inspection to people that possibly plantings are home grown without a permit? Do you have the manpower to do so, or do you use DPS or ATB, alcohol and tobacco? Which one do you use there, sir?
So, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
So within the law, our responsibilities are to maintain the registry.
Yeah.
And so we do the process of permitting, making sure that they're in compliance, that they're doing what they can to ensure that it's not getting in the hands of minors. Again, going back to the law that we're talking about, there is a concern that we've had for a while that, let's say somebody submits a plan that says they aren't going to keep it safe from their children, that they have 2 kids under 21, and in their plan we ask them, like, what are you going to do to make sure that it's safe, that they're not have access to it? There is a possibility that they could say, this is the plan, and if it's inadequate or we don't feel like that's actually safe, we have no ability to deny that under the law. We have to give them a license. If we revoke somebody's license for a severe violation, there's nothing stopping them from going back and applying for another one. And we won't be able to deny them. And so this is a big hole that we think is an easy fix. It's just getting rid of the line that says that we can't deny. And that's something that we're hoping to be able to do. In the enforcement side, that is a DPS function, but they do have communication
Okay.
with the commission as to if they do see a house with marijuana, they check with the commission to make sure that they have to see whether or not they have a license for it or they're listed within the registry. And from that point, it goes into the checks as to whether or not the size is appropriate for what they have and these elements. But the registry itself, just again, for reiteration of what the law contains, is completely anonymous for most of the people, or confidential, not anonymous, confidential. That I don't know who's on the list. Really, the managing director is the only individual that knows who's on the list and is able to say whether or not somebody is or not. And that is a part of the law as well. It's only for law enforcement functions.
Thank you. Do you conduct for a person who's going to get a business license, like what Rep. Camacho was saying, education? Do you do a training or anything like that first before obtaining the license, or you just issue it out as you please because they have the property and so forth? Do you give them a refresher course to make sure they understand the regulation? Do you have that?
Oh, I'm sorry. So we do have a process for licensure, and that does have a lot of actually pretty onerous components to it, depending on what license you're looking
Okay.
at. One area in particular is that we aren't we made an active decision not to stifle innovation and tell them to do specific things in a certain way. What we did was we laid out exactly in trying to be as clear as possible what you can and cannot do, but also provide them the requirement to provide us with how they're going to do it. And within the review process, both within the site inspection, within the application review, and within the meeting that we have prior to licensure with them, we talk to them about their SOPs. We talk to them about their procedures that they've listed out as what they're going to do. The commission themselves do an initial review on the admin level. If there is something that just doesn't comply or isn't something that is within the norm of what we're expecting, then we just say to them, this is the issue, and we'd like you to fix this.
Okay.
There's a lot of areas that, because it's a new industry within an official connotation of it, there's a lot of areas that demand people to think creatively. And these are things like, how are you going to dispose? There's a lot of really good ideas on proper disposal that turns it into compost that is able to do it. There's a lot of interesting things about security and how to manage those elements. We have requirements, for instance, there that you have to have security cameras. You have to be able to have security cameras on these areas. If there is inadequate coverage, then that's something that we address with them during the site inspection. But what they do outside of those base requirements is something that has been educational, I think, for us to be able to understand, okay, this is how the industry, how operators within the industry operate and how they are meeting their needs. And it's useful to know what isn't working for them, what are the challenges that they're going through. And it's been a really good conversation with a lot of the licenses when we have these meetings prior to licensure, talking to them about, okay, what were your challenges with CUC? What were your challenges with water access? What were your challenges with issues like zoning? Or what are your pest management processes? How are you going to, we have had really innovative ideas on hydroponics that are exciting, and people are really, the young folks that are involved in it are really excited about being able to do this and put their interest areas into piloting out this new type here. And yeah, it's been a collaborative process, not just with the agencies, but with the licensees, but making sure that primarily what they have to do is meet the basic requirements, the strict requirements of the law, the strict requirements of the regulations. And from that point, we work with them to make sure that everything is gelling as best we can.
Okay, thank you for that. One more question before I close, madam. Content. This for business people. They're selling marijuana. How proof do you have? How effective? For the same value the other person is selling for the same amount. And what is the content? Do you have a tester? You have to go around and say, you are selling, you can say, bogus marijuana. It's important that they have to be tested because that's free market, right? So do you have that capability, sir?
So under the law, what is the requirement with the absence of a lab facility is to label the product as untested. And this is a check that we do on each of the labeling for each of the applicants, is to make sure that the labeling requirements are present, that they're adequately labeling it, that the design, for instance, doesn't contain cartoon characters, but critically that if it isn't tested, it says untested. We did recently put together the regulations for laboratory licensure, and the standards that we're looking for. That is a really large investment requirement, but I know that there are individuals, I've heard that there are individuals who are interested. Nobody has submitted a license yet for a lab. That is one of the things, because there are several licenses. There are producers, of course, there are retailers, of course, lounges. There's also a processor. And a processor is the one that creates the edibles. Within the processor license, we established 5 endorsements, which is modeled after the Oregon example. Endorsements are for topicals, for extracts, for concentrates, for edibles, these things. We have not decided to allow for endorsements on edibles and these elements because we don't have a lab. And we don't want the potency to be an issue because primarily if it's too potent. If it's less potent and they're advertising it poorly, my perspective, and I think maybe this is just maybe a philosophical standpoint, is that the market should correct for that. If somebody is selling you something that isn't quality, then you move to the next person, and that's the benefit of competition. That it's in the interest of every operator to make sure that what they're selling is quality products, and that it's something that the market would do. If they are doing a poor job, then they should be able to, the market should dictate that they should no longer be in operation. And I think that's the position that I've been at, is when it comes to quality and when it comes to the ability for the operators to succeed within a competitive market. This isn't the casino, right? This is multiple licenses. They're all competing with each other, and they should be allowed to compete.
Well, if you look at it, that's good. That's a good regulation because you determine whether that marijuana is good or not. But that's only good for the people right here. What about if a tourist came in this morning and he popped some this afternoon, and then tomorrow morning he leaves? How can you complain? That's important that we need the quality tester to make sure that the product is quality. Thank you. I hear back.
Yeah, and we do have requirements that they're not falsely advertising a product. If for instance, within the regulations, if they're saying that it does one thing and it doesn't do that thing, number one, they're not allowed to say that it has any therapeutic or medicinal benefits. That's not allowed. But number two, if it's saying that it has a certain THC level and they're not able to prove it, then that's an area that we can get involved in and say that is false. Yeah.
I hear
Thank
back.
you, Rep. Lizama. Any more questions? Okay, yes, Rep. Corina.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick follow-up with regard, you spoke of the norm when checking facilities to determine whether or not to uh, give them the license. And so I was curious, when you say the norm, what are those norms? Do you use a guideline of some sort to determine whether they meet all those check marks, or do you use your own personal discretion to determine? So what are the norms that you refer to?
Yeah. So the norms, we did our best to make sure that all of our expectations are listed within the regulations, that we have a basis for determining. So I'm sure we talked a little bit about this previously, but I think it may be worth reiterating just so that we're all aware that we have in the current time frame, we have a 2-stage process for licensure where we go through the paper license. If they meet all the paper requirements, they've submitted their floor plan, they've submitted their background check information, they submitted all the required documentation for the property. They get an approval in principle, and that allows them to schedule in their site inspection. And the site inspection is an entirely separate process almost, where the commission staff go, and we have one coming up potentially, where they go and they make sure that what they said in their application was what's actually there, that the locations and marcation within a facility is really important, that the canopy size and the cultivation area that is required within each licensure is something that needs to be explicitly within the floor plan, but it also needs to be explicit within the area that they're operating, so they're not branching out of that intentionally or unintentionally. And so these are the elements that we're looking at, is whether or not in some cases they have whether the locks look secure enough for the areas that should be locked. We do have a requirement that some areas be padlocked or have locking capabilities. If it's a shoddy lock, then that's something that we would take a note of and say, this is like a lock for a diary or something, right? And that's something I think we would like to know. when we're reviewing applications and something that we would like to see corrected, as an example.
Great, thank you. And one last, Chairwoman, sorry. So you'd mentioned that in the absence of a lab, right, they would just label it right? And so how, I mean, there's always going to be somebody out there that's going to try to, do bad stuff. And so what do you guys have in place to ensure that you try to like help mitigate that or help deter people like that from like that Lizama and Beth said, like how do you know there it's real cannabis and not, I don't know how a fake one would look like, but just you know trying to mitigate that.
Yeah, I think not to try to sell the process or our needs too much, but if we had a CTS, I think that provides adequate provenance for the origins of each product that is being sold, and that is really the benefit and the beauty of it, is that it is in other places known as a seed to sale. So if we had an adequate, a fully running system that was identical to those in the other areas, we would know how many seeds were being planted, what the identification of those seeds are, how many of those seeds became plants, what the identification of that plant is, where it went, what it was broken up into. Was it into smaller packages? Was it a large batch? Was it rolled into, was it brought to a processor? And if some issue happened at point of sale that came up to the attention, we would be able to trace the provenance of the entire supply chain for that particular item, which would add for regulatory ease in a way. Yeah. And so there are processes that we have. I think we have had conversations about recalls and the process for that. There is inspection allowances that we could inspect any of the issues, any of the licenses for documentation, these elements. But we added in additional reporting requirements to replicate a CTS. So every month the producers provide their production reports of how many they're producing. We have the retailers and the recipients of that cross-check with their invoices and receipts, and then the endpoint. So we're able to partially dissect the supply channels, and it's adequate now because it isn't. We've had the opportunity, I guess, because of COVID, to have a slow start, and we're able to build it in with a lower number of licenses. But currently there's no limitation on licenses. And so the potentiality is that there could be a significant amount. We do have and I know this may be a question that comes up, we did provide within the regulations the allowance for limitation. On licenses. And we have gone through a pretty extensive process of determining how, in the event that a limitation did be put in place, how selections would occur within that process. Yeah, we have we have a long conversation, and we're still trying to work out the details of how that would occur. And that's the hard part, right? Within the Administrative Procedures Act, process matters. And if we don't do a process that is firm and adequately protecting the rights of individuals to certain licenses, or not rights, but their access to it, and not disenfranchising anybody because of an improper process. I think that has been one of the primary concerns of how we're conducting this entire operation, but especially if we have limitations. When you say you can't have something, it becomes a much greater onus on you to make sure that you're doing it the right way. And at the current moment, it seems like even with limitations of staff, but through collaboration, we're able to manage the enforcement load well with the current licensees. We do want to build up. We do want to make sure that we are adequately not just covering the existing licenses, but built to scale, that we can scale up to larger needs. And we've put in place areas that we can, make checks on this. One thing in particular is micro producers. And I know that we've had similar conversations, and all of you, I think, are on SNILD. We have made recommendations for changes to the zoning law that would make it a little bit more in accordance with our CNMI law, especially on micro producers. We think that there's a huge potential for young people, for locals to be micro producers and participate in the industry on a commercial level. But the zoning requirements for them to do conditional use permits, to go and do a public hearing, to do all these processes that are required for larger businesses, is seeming to be a deterrent on their ability to do that. But once we do have an ease of access for micro producers, that creates another problem of having too many. And so one of the things that we put in place, at least for Saipan, because of the population, is having micro producers only be able to sell to a wholesaler and not to directly to retailers. So at that point, we're not regulating 20 micro producers, we're regulating one wholesaler. And so we only go to one point and see whether or not they have adequate regulatory protections on their end to protect their license for all of their suppliers within the micro production area. So these are the things that we're trying to put in place to be able to do it well and to make sure that it's adequately regulated.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that information and clarification. The more you talk about the CTS, the more I believe that you guys are in dire need of that system. And with the lack of funds that you guys are challenged with right now, I'm curious as to what plans, if any, do you guys have to try and obtain that system? I mean, I know that in the budget, that's probably one of the requests, but if that is not possible, what other alternatives have you guys considered to try and get the system in place?
And I think this is two parts, right? So the bill has some really necessary components in it. For instance, the licensure on ending in September. Again, the registry. I know that in previous conversations with the legislature, one of the sticking points has been the revolving fund. And if there's issues on the legislature, that's fine, and that's definitely your prerogative. We're just trying to provide you an angle for it. But in the absence of that, I think the original structure was that if they had needs, that we would come to the legislature and that there would be appropriations for it. And I think once we get a full recognition of what the costs are through the RFQ process and through the procurement process, I think we would all really appreciate it, and I think we would do our best to justify an additional appropriation if we don't have the funding through a revolving fund, if that's the decision of the legislature, or if we don't have enough money within that revolving fund. We want to. I think we're working to put ourselves in a position where we can have a conversation with you guys within the House as the controllers of the purse, right? To be able to justify the need. And if you feel that it's necessary within the cost that we're presenting, then that would be great news.
Great, thank you for that. I yield, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Rep. Corina. Any more questions?
How about just one more?
Oh, yes, Rep. Ben.
Thank you. This is a very easy question. Has a feasibility assessment ever been conducted in countries that we host in our tourism industry?
CNMI specific, is that correct?
I.e., Japan, South Korea.
Of their market demand for CNMI's cannabis? Not that I'm aware of, no. I know that there are some issues with extraterritoriality of penalties. I'm not an expert in Korean law, but I think I've heard that there are issues with that the Korean government's restrictions on the use of marijuana extend beyond its borders. So if you use it in Saipan, it potentially is a crime in Korea. I've heard that. I feel sort of silly saying it without actually confirming or having the details, but I think there are some issues that that the operators of the industry, especially those who are focused in on tourism, should have the onus. I mean, they do have the onus to make sure that their business plan works and that their business model works, if that is their model.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I yield.
Thank you, Rep. Ben. Any more? Any more questions? Okay, I just have one. I don't know if it's confusing or whatever, but you've been talking about laws, following the laws. Then we have this thing here to amend 4 CMC and 53074. Says the Department of Public Lands and all government entities shall not lease or use public lands for the purpose of establishing cannabis businesses or establishments. Then the insert is this will not affect the lands located in the Northern Islands. And we know that cannabis is not fully, what is that, approved yet? Not, yeah, federally, yes. So, because this is a new industry, and if cannabis is planted in the Northern Islands, I mean, I don't know how you're gonna take those seats up there without the Coast Guard stopping you. But how will, if there's something up there, how will it be transported without breaking the law? Or you just bury them in the Northern Islands?
Yeah, I think you're touching upon a really important conversation that currently not just affects the Northern Islands, but Tinian and Rota. And our guidance on this question is it is federally illegal. And if you are thinking about transporting, talk to a lawyer. And like it is federally illegal. And that's something that we continue to talk about in meetings and to remind folks that we are very interested in not crossing that bound that was carefully set by the crafters of this legislation to try and do everything possible to restrict the direct violations of some of the standards that the federal government is looking for. I think in our conversation, it seemed like the Northern Islands has a role within the industry, and the crafters of the law, I think, envision that by adding in a member of the Northern Islands to the commission. That there is a member of the commission that is appointed and recommended by the mayor of the Northern Islands. And so if he is representing the interest of the Northern Islands within the commission and trying to establish the industry, it is our position that they should be allowed, if they have the rights to be able to grow there and they have the ability to farm or homestead or live, that they should be afforded the same rights to do these things as you would in Tinian, Saipan, and Rota. I know it is the position, and it has been the longstanding position of the Northern Islands people and the CNMI government that resettlement is a goal. And how do you do that? And I think it's difficult to do that if you don't have an economy, if you don't have an industry. How that flushes out within this structure is unknown. It would be illegal to, I mean, it is federally illegal, and that is the existing thing. But it's right now all of the Northern Islands are public lands, and I'm not sure it's unclear as to whether or not this law adequately took that into account when they're envisioning the full extent of the operation in the CNMI. So it really is, there's going to be challenges as there is anywhere, but I think extreme challenges when it comes to the Northern Islands, but at least if you're able to go through those challenges, not prohibiting somebody from being interested in looking at making it happen because of this provision. I mean, we talked about tourism in Pagan for a long time, and it doesn't necessarily have to be transported.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, any more questions? Okay, we're good. Thank you. Thank you for clarifying things and educating us on cannabis and following the laws. Thank you.
Thank you
are
so much
dismissed. Yes.
for all the conversation and the communication that we've had. It's hoping to continue talking to you and the legislature about our needs and how we can make it work better. So thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Good night. Oh, next on the agenda, miscellaneous. Any? Okay, none. Announcements. Okay, next one, adjournment.
I move.
All right. It has been moved and seconded. Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, say nay. Okay, meeting is adjourned.